Welcome to a sleepy story from long ago. Hello there, weary traveler. You've wandered into a quiet corner of time, a place where the winds howl over snow-covered hills, where stone cottages crouch beneath the sky, and where humble people lived, fought, and endured. In this story, we journey into medieval Scotland, not to follow the lives of kings or knights, but to walk beside the barefoot peasants who tended sheep, baked bread, feared the pox, and clutched their children through bitter storms. There are no battles to win here, only fire to keep lit, water to carry, and stories to whisper through the heather-scented dark. Let your worries soften now. The world can wait. Tonight, we are going somewhere old and slow and safe. Tuck yourself in. Loosen your breath. We begin now in a place where the rain speaks louder than words. The first snow came early that year. It whispered in on a breath of wind that smelled of peat smoke and wet earth. Up in the Highland hills, where the soil grew thin and the sky sat low, the snow didn't bother to wait for the harvest to finish. It fell in lazy flakes over barley fields still standing, over drying racks of fish, and over the roof of one particular stone cottage half sunk into the slope of a hill like it was trying to disappear into the earth itself. Inside that cottage, the fire had already burned down to a red, sighing glow. The hearth was the heart of the home, and tonight it pulsed quietly with the last of the gorse wood. Smoke curled up through a chimney made of stacked rocks and damp moss, drawing shadows across the thatched ceiling. The scent inside was one of sour milk, damp wool, old ashes, and something like onions that had been boiled too long. Familiar, heavy, home. A woman stirred in the corner, wrapped in layers of coarse linen and sheep fleece. Her name was Moira, and she had been awake since before the sun even thought about rising. Sleep, to her, was something that happened only when nothing else needed doing. But nothing ever stopped needing doing. She leaned over the pot, stirring slowly. Barley porridge with nettles and a scrap of dried mutton bone. It wasn't enough, but it was what there was. The baby stirred on the cot behind her, and a dog thumped its tail without opening its eyes. It was always cold now, the kind of cold that lived in your fingers even when you sat by the fire. The walls of the cottage were thick with stone and packed with mud, but the wind always found its way through the cracks. Some nights it cried through the eaves, like a ghost come looking for someone it once loved. Moira had learned to sleep through that sound, but tonight it was louder, wilder, like something was coming. She didn't say that aloud. In the Highlands, you didn't name things that you feared. Not the illness that took her brother last spring, not the howling in the woods, not the eyes that sometimes watched from the tree line when you went to fetch water after sunset. Instead, you worked. You kept your hands busy and your lips quiet. She ladled out the porridge into a wooden bowl and handed it to her oldest, a boy named Aidan. 9 winters had carved out his face like a grown man's. He said nothing, only took the bowl and sat, cross-legged by the fire. The baby cried, and Moira scooped her up, pressing her against her chest beneath the wool shawl. Warmth traveled between them like something sacred. Outside, hoofbeats crackled against the frost. Moira's head snapped up. No one rode this far unless they had reason or trouble. Her fingers reached for the iron nail hammered above the doorframe. A bit of old superstition her grandmother swore would keep out wicked spirits, and English soldiers alike. A figure appeared in the small square window. Just an outline, broad-shouldered, heavy, with a cloak wet from the weather. A knock, then silence. Moira opened the door with caution. Cold air knifed in. A man stood there. Not a soldier, not a priest. Just another Highlander, boots caked in. Mud, face lined with hunger and rain. He held out a hand. "Evenin'," he said, voice like gravel. "Got word there was a midwife here?" Moira hesitated. She wasn't a midwife. Not really. She just knew herbs, knew how to stop a fever, how to ease. A birthing when the baby came backwards. She looked down at the baby in her arms, then back at the stranger. "Who's birthing?" "My sister, up near the burn." She screamed. A shriek cut through the hills, even over the wind. It was thin and sharp. Not human, but not animal either. Looked back into her cottage, the porridge, the fire, the children, the warmth dot, then she nodded. "Leave the horse. We'll walk faster." They moved through the dark like shadows. The snow had turned to sleet, wet and biting. Moira's boots were stuffed with straw and rags, but it didn't matter, her toes were numb within minutes. The path wound between bare-branched trees and wet rock. No lights, no torches. They moved by memory and the occasional flicker of lightning. Behind the clouds, the man's name he finally offered was Dare. His sister was 30, unmarried, and the baby was coming too soon. "It's been a hard winter," he muttered. Moira didn't answer. Every winter was hard. They reached the small croft just as the wind picked up again, flinging snow into their faces like a warning. Inside, the cottage was even poorer than hers. No fire. Just a heap of blankets on a straw mattress and the figure of a woman soaked in sweat and pain. Moira dropped to her knees beside her. Her hands moved automatically, checking the belly, the position, the time left. "She's young for." "This?" Moira asked. "Not by Highland reckoning," said Dare. The woman groaned, clutching Moira's wrist like it was the only thing keeping her on this side of the world. Moira whispered to her, not words of comfort, but old things, herbal prayers, bits of rhymes her mother had used, and all the while, outside, the storm growled like something angry. Hours passed. When the baby came, it came fast. A girl, pale and small, but breathing. Moira bit the cord with her teeth and wrapped the infant in the cleanest scrap of wool she could find. The mother, eyes wet with exhaustion, whispered a thank you that Moira barely heard. Dare stood back like a statue, face unreadable. "Name her something strong," Moira said. "This world's not gentle." They walked back in silence. The wind had dropped and the snow was soft again. In the distance, a wolf howled. Moira didn't flinch. She knew wolves. Hunger, too dot when they reached her cottage. Dawn was smudging the sky with gray. Smoke, still, curled from her chimney. She opened the door and stepped inside to the smell of old porridge and the sound of her baby sleeping. Dai, our pause behind her. "You're owed something." Moira shook her head. "Not by you." She shut the door and bolted it. Then she sat by the fire, stretched her aching legs, and took the sleeping baby into her arms again. Aidan stirred, rubbed his eyes, and asked if the storm had passed. Moira only said, "Aye, for now." Outside, the snow began to melt in quiet drops. The cracked stone cottage, tired but standing, waited for the next night, and the one after that. The smell reached them first. It slipped over the ridge like a snake, sour, bitter, sharp, with grease and burning leather. Adan was the one who noticed it, crouched outside by the sheepfold as he tried to patch a fence post with twine and wishful. Thinking, he paused, nose lifted like a young hound. "Ma," he called. "Do you smell it?" Moira emerged from the cottage, wiping flour from her hands. She sniffed. Then again, slower this time. "I," she murmured. They both stood still, listening. The wind rolled down from the northeast, cold and restless, carrying more than just the smoke. It carried warning. There were no chimneys in that direction. No homes close enough to explain it. Just forest, empty hills. And if rumors could be believed, a handful of outlaws who'd fled the last tax levy with blood on their hands and hunger at their heels. Moira didn't like rumors. They stirred people up, made them see enemies in every crow and shadow. But smoke meant fire, and fire meant something or someone was near. She sent Adan back inside and climbed the ridge alone. The hill was steep, and the heather clung to her skirts like fingers. Each step squished in damp moss or skidded on slick rock. But Moira moved as if the earth owed her no favors, and she expected none. Her eyes narrowed against the wind, lips tight, her shawl pulled snug over her hair. At the top, she crouched. The smoke rose just past the next ridge, thin and gray, too thin for a hearth fire, too dark for burning peat. Wood, fresh, green wood, and something else beneath it, something sour. She stood there for a long while, staring at that smoke, thinking about what it might mean. Then she turned back toward the cottage. There was bread to finish baking. That evening the sheep were restless. The older Away with the torn ear wouldn't eat, and the ram butted the pen like something had riled him. Adan tried to calm them with handfuls of hay and a song his dee used to sing, but the flock crowded against the far wall like they'd seen a ghost. Moira took a lantern and checked the perimeter, barefoot in the cold grass. Nothing, no prints, no blood, just the sound of wind in the trees, and beneath it the distant, pulsing hush of something moving that shouldn't have been. She stayed up late, weaving another row into the reed mat she used as a door curtain. Her fingers were red and raw from work, but her mind stayed sharp. Years ago, before the children, before even the cottage, Moira had walked miles for the old hedge witch in the valley, learned what roots did what, which herbs numbed pain, which burned fever from the belly. That same woman once told her, "When the animals go quiet, look to the woods. When they go loud, look to the wind." The sheep had gone loud. So Moira listened to the wind. By morning, the smoke had moved. It was closer now, thicker, and Adan said he saw shadows near the stream, too tall to be deer, too quiet to be men. She packed a basket. Not to leave, but to be ready. 3 loaves of oat bread, a wedge of dried cheese, 2 willow bark bundles, and the little blue cloth bundle tucked far at the bottom, her mother's comb, made from horn and carved with tiny horses. It was the only pretty thing she owned. If they had to run, she'd carry it. By midday, the air had changed. Not just the smell, but the feel. Heavy, close, a sky too still. Even the crows had vanished from the trees. Moira told the children they'd stay inside. She barred the door, closed the shutters, and fed the fire until it danced. A knock came after sundown, not a bang, just a tap, delicate, curious. Moira took the poker from the hearth and motioned Dan to stand behind her. Then, slowly, she unlatched the door and opened it a crack. A girl stood there, no more than 15, mud up to her knees, hair matted, eyes red from smoke. She didn't speak, just swayed slightly, as if her feet had forgotten what solid ground felt like. Moira pulled her inside without a word. She set her by the fire, wrapped her in a wool blanket, and gave her a ladle of broth from the pot. Only after the second sip did the girl speak. They burned it. Moira knelt beside her. Who did? The girl blinked. Her lips were cracked. Men, helmets. One with a red sash, they came after dark, said we owed silver. Da said no, so they... Her voice fell to ash. Moira didn't press. There had been talk of soldiers collecting late levies, punishing defiance by torch. And now they were close, too close. That night, Moira didn't sleep. She sat by the fire with a girl who said her name was Isla. Her village had been 6 crofts down by the river. Nothing left now but cinders and HOOFPR. INTS. Dawn came quiet and pale. Moira sent Dan out with a small pouch, told him to go to Ewan's Croft 3 hills over and tell him what happened. That fire was coming, that they needed to scatter. Aidan didn't want to go. You'll need me here, he said, stiff-lipped. I need you alive, Moira answered. He left with the pouch bouncing on his belt, boots too big, hair wild in the wind. Moira turned back to the fire, back to Isla, asleep now in a bundle of blankets. Back to the long day ahead, because if smoke was on the wind, fire would follow, and Moira McCallum wasn't going to let it take her home. Not this time. The snow had mostly melted, but the mud left behind was a treacherous thing. It clung to boots and skirts, swallowed cartwheels, and turned every path into a guessing game. If you were lucky, the earth held you. If not, it slipped away beneath your step, and you landed knee-deep in peat and curses. Moira had done just that twice before noon, and now her hem was soaked to mid-shin, and the baby wouldn't stop fussing. Still, she trudged on, the child on her hip Aaron, small and soft, as a puff of dandelion gnawed sleepily at the corner of Moira's shawl. The girl Isla, still pale but stronger, followed a few steps behind with a basket slung over her arm. They were heading toward the old well beneath the rowan tree, the only source of drinkable water for miles. The spring by the stream had gone, cloudy, as if something upstream had stirred up silt and secret rot. Moira didn't like the thought of that. Wells in the Highlands weren't just holes in the ground. They had memory, some said, the old kinds of memory. You didn't shout near them, you didn't spit, and if a leaf fell in while you were drawing water, you let it lie. You didn't fish it out. The well beneath the rowan was older than the path that led to it, older than the stones of Moira's cottage, and standing guard beside it, like some small mossy sentinel, was the one-eyed goat. No one owned the goat. It had simply always been there. They reached the well just past midday, when the clouds began to cluster low over the hills like sheep waiting to be shorn. The air was wet, heavy with the scent of moss and old bark. The rowan tree rose crooked and red-barked above the clearing, its bare limbs reaching like fingers toward nothing in particular. Moira stopped 10 paces from the well and looked for the goat. Sure enough, it stood by the stones, chewing on a scrap of bracken, one eye cloudy and useless, the other sharp as a blackthorn. It watched them come, expression unreadable. A curl of its horn had cracked somewhere along the way, and now jutted sideways like a crooked crown. You'll not try to bite today. I hope, Moira muttered. Half to herself, Isla hung back, eyeing the goat as if it might grow wings and fly at her. Moira stepped forward and gave the animal a respectful nod. Then she lowered her pail into the well. The rope creaked. The pail splashed. Water hissed against stone. Why does it stay here? Isla asked softly. The goat? Moira braced her feet and hauled the pail up. Isla nodded. Some say it was left behind by the monks when they fled the priory, Moira said. Others say it drank from the well and now it can't leave. Is that true? Likely not. But stories don't need truth. They only need telling. She poured the water into a jug and handed it to Isla, then lowered the pail again. The wind shifted. Behind them, leaves rustled in a directionless swirl. Moira stiffened. The baby let out a sleepy cough. Isla clutched the basket tighter. It wasn't fear. Not quite. More like the skin remembering something before the mind did. Moira turned slowly and scanned the trees. Nothing. Just the deep, velvet quiet of the forest. Still, she dipped her fingers into the fresh water and whispered an old rhyme under her breath, something her grandmother used to say at wells and doorways. Stone hold, water run, keep my hearth from anyone. She flicked the droplets onto the ground and rubbed the rest into Aaron's hair. Done? Isla asked, voice small. Moira nodded. Aye, let's not linger. On the way back they ran into Ewan, or rather he nearly ran into them. He came barreling around a bend in the path, hair wild, cheeks red from wind, eyes bright with the kind of urgency that made Moira's stomach tighten before he even opened his mouth. Trouble, he gasped. North Trail. Soldiers. How many? Moira asked, shifting Aaron higher on her hip. Half-dozen, maybe more. Crossed the far pass. This morning. Burning crofts as they go. Looking for levies or rebels. They've split into two groups. Do they know about us? Not yet, but they're close. Moira exhaled through her nose. She'd seen this pattern before. Roving soldiers, collecting late taxes, searching for anyone who might have supported a rival lord or simply failed to pay what was demanded. They came like wolves. And, like wolves, they didn't always stop at sheep. Is your croft safe? She asked. For now, Ewan said. But I'm taking my bairns into the woods. Hiding just in case. Wanted to warn you first. Moira looked toward the path behind her, the way back to her own cottage, where Adan was likely trying to mend the chimney with old peat bricks. Thank you, she said. Ewan nodded and jogged. Off into the trees, a bow slung over his shoulder, and a sack bouncing against his back. Moira turned to Isla. We need to hurry. They reached the cottage as the clouds cracked, and a slow drizzle began to fall. Adan met them at the door, face smudged with soot. The chimney's worse, he said. Half of it fell in. We'll fix it later, Moira replied. She handed Aaron to Isla and dropped the jugs by the hearth. Her mind was already working paths, caches, escape routes. The hollow behind the elder grove, the root cellar down by the fence post. They'd survived raids before. The trick was not to panic. Panic got you killed. She opened the chest under the cot and pulled out the things she'd been saving: salted meat wrapped in linen, dried rosehip berries, a flask of vinegar, and 2 small knives. "Is it time to run?" Isla asked. Moira shook her head. "Not yet, but maybe soon." That night the wind picked up again. Dotted pressed against the shutters like a restless hand. The fire popped and hissed in protest, and the roof creaked as if remembering worse storms. Moira sat awake by the hearth, sharpening the smaller of the knives. She didn't expect to use it, but readiness was a kind of magic, too. The baby slept, curled beside Isla in the cot. Aidan was sprawled on the floor, his foot twitching in some half-remembered dream of chasing sheep. Moira sipped water from a clay cup and listened, nothing but the wind, until a rustle. Not the wind. Not the house. Outside. Moira rose slowly, easing the knife into her palm. She crept to the door and pressed her ear against it. Another rustle. A thump. Then, chewing, she unlatched the door and opened it a finger's width. The one-eyed goat stood on her threshold. It blinked at her. "Did you follow us?" she whispered. The goat gave a low bleat, then trotted around to the side of the cottage and butted its head against the wall. Moira followed. It stood there, breathing hard, then stepped aside to reveal a boot print, fresh, deep in the mud. Facing the window, someone had been watching. Moira's breath caught. The goat snorted and stamped its hoof. "You saw them first," she murmured. "Didn't you?" The goat didn't answer, just chewed thoughtfully on a thistle. Moira returned inside and bolted the door. She woke Aidan and Isla, told them to pack their things quietly. No questions. They'd leave at first light. By dawn, the sky had cleared to a thin, pale blue, cold as stone. The air smelled like frost, and something cleaner like escape. They left the cottage in silence, Moira carrying the baby, Isla with the food, Aidan with the tools. The goat, uninvited, followed a few paces behind, tail twitching. They moved into the woods toward the elder grove, where the roots tangled so thick you couldn't walk straight. That's where Moira had built a hidden nook years ago, just in case. They were halfway there when they heard it. A shout. Then another. Back near the cottage. And then flames. Isla gasped. Aidan turned to run, but Moira grabbed his arm. "No," she said. "We're not saving a house. We're saving ourselves." The boy nodded, eyes brimming. They pressed deeper into the trees. They reached the elder grove by midday and found the hollow untouched, dry, sheltered. Moira built a small fire, buried beneath a stone ring to hide the light. They ate in silence, hands trembling but steady. The baby gurgled, chewing on her fingers. Moira watched the smoke from the fire drift upward and vanish into the leaves. She thought of the cottage, the bread rising by the hearth, the wool blanket, the old iron nail above the door. Gone now, but not everything was lost. Isla curled beside her. Aidan sat watch near the edge of the grove, knife across his knees. The one-eyed goat lay near the fire, chewing its cud, looking, if not pleased, at least at home. Moira touched the baby's cheek. "We'll find a new place," she whispered. "We always do." And somewhere behind the rustle of branches the wind shifted again, this time bringing no smoke. Just the sound of running water, a new beginning. carried on the breeze. They stayed in the elder grove for 3 days, 3 cold, quiet days, the sort that pass not with clocks or calendars, but with the steady rhythm of breath and the soft crackle of fire, the sort where one learns to listen, truly listen to the trees and the damp soil and the flutter of bird wings overhead. Moira marked the time by the baby's feedings and by how many pieces of dried bread remained. Aidan kept count of the nights. Isla, now stronger in voice and step, wove a crown of elder twigs and stuck it on the goat's head when no one was looking. The goat didn't seem to mind. The forest, at least for now, held them like a cupped hand. Its bare limbs whispered secrets and warnings. Cold wind wove between the trees, and while the fire gave warmth, it gave away their presence too. So they kept it low, hidden beneath a shallow pit of stones and peat. But food was running short. Moira knew it before anyone else said it. Aidan had eaten less with each meal, trying not to show it. Isla offered up her portion more than once. And Moira, she pretended to chew when nothing touched her tongue. The baby-sweet Erin had begun to cry longer between feedings. Her soft cheeks, once plump as bread dough, now hollowed like rising loaves that had fallen. It was time to move, but not back. Never back. They needed bread. Real bread. Flour. Salt. Water from a spring that hadn't been cursed by fire or blood. And they needed the blessing stone. The blessing stone wasn't a story. It was a fact, a granite slab the size of a low bed, tucked into the hill behind the ruins of what had once been a church, then a cattle barn, then last anyone remembered just a roofless shell with no name. The slab had a bowl carved into it. Rainwater gathered there, and if you bathed your bread in it before baking, it rose true. No mold, no cracking, no curses, or so it was said. Moira had used it only once before, long ago, when Aidan was barely walking and her husband still sang in the mornings. She remembered the way the bread smelled, remembered how the crust gleamed gold, how the inside steamed, sweet and soft as spring air. That bread had lasted a full week. It was time to go back. She rose before dawn on the 4th morning and gathered her things. Not much. The last of the barley, flour wrapped in cloth, a pinch of salt, a chipped wooden spoon, and her smallest iron pot. Isla stirred beside her, but didn't speak. Aidan remained asleep, curled against the goat for warmth. Moira pressed a kiss to Erin's forehead and left the babe in Isla's arms. "I'll return before moonrise," she said. And then she vanished into the trees. The path to the blessing stone was not one she could describe. Even to herself, it wasn't marked, not really. You had to feel your way, past a fallen log shaped like a giant's thigh, over the stream where the water whispered in 3 tones, left at the lichen-covered boulder with the hole, shaped like a heart. The forest grew thick here, older, even the birds sounded different, quieter, more thoughtful, as if they, too, remembered the days when priests had walked barefoot here, whispering Latin and burning wax. Moira moved quickly but softly. Her breath fogged the air. Her fingers curled around the flower sack like it might try to fly away. And at last there it was, the church that WASN single quotes T a dashed church. Stone walls blackened with moss, archways broken like snapped ribs, a floor of flattened earth and bones of long dead trees. And in the center, the blessing stone dot gray as twilight, still as the grave. Damp with ancient rain, Moira knelt beside it. She placed the pot on the slab, and opened the flower, measured with her eye. Salt first, then flour, then water scooped from the hollow. She stirred it with the spoon slowly as the cold stung her fingers. The dough was rough, not elegant, but it held. She pulled it into a soft round and pressed it with her thumb. A single dent, just like her grandmother used to do. Then she whispered, not a prayer, nothing so formal. Just her own kind of asking. For the child, for the fire, for the ones who walk beside me. She waited. Nothing changed. The wind didn't pause. The trees didn't hush, but she felt it. A warmth beneath her kneecaps, a hush beneath the noise. The air grew heavier, as if the forest had placed a hand on her shoulder and said, yes. She rose, carefully set the dough in the iron pot, covered it with moss and a cloth, and lit a small fire under the stones. It would take time. Proper bread always did. She walked the perimeter while it baked. Looking, listening. She stopped by the old stone arch and sat beneath it, chewing a dried berry. Above her a crow landed on the broken lintel and stared down. You'll have none of this, she told it. Don't even try. The crow blinked, then flew away. The smell was what told her it was ready. Warm, real, the smell of life continuing. Moira pulled back the cloth and saw the bread had risen golden and round, cracked just slightly at the top, like it had laughed in its sleep. She wept. Silently, just a few tears. Then she wrapped the loaf in the cloth, tucked it against her chest, and made her way back. She didn't go straight to the grove. She had one more stop to make, the ridge, the high place. From there she could see her old cottage, or what was left of it. Smoke no longer rose from the stones. The roof had fully collapsed. Even the garden wall had crumbled. But the tree behind it, the rowan, still stood. Even from here, its limbs looked stubborn, and beside the stump where the well had been, something moved, a figure, too far to see clearly, but unmistakably human, watching the ruins, or perhaps guarding them. Moira narrowed her eyes, then turned away. The bread was cooling, and her children were waiting. By dusk, she was back in the grove. Isla ran to meet her, Aaron swaddled tight and fussing. Aidan stood with the goat, which bleated in greeting. Moira sat by the fire and unwrapped the bread. The smell filled the clearing like a memory made real. Isla covered her mouth. Aidan actually smiled. Moira broke the loaf into 4 pieces. They ate slowly, reverently. Even the goat got a bite. No one spoke. The forest watched. And far away, past. Hills and ruins and soldiers and storms, the blessing stone sat quietly, soaking up the moonlight and waiting for the next desperate soul who remembered how to ask. The bread lasted 3 days, not because it was large, though it had risen, better than anything Moira had ever baked in the wild, but because they treated it like treasure. A crust for breakfast, a crumb for supper. Even the baby got a fingertip, dipped in the soft middle, her eyes going wide, as if she'd tasted sunshine. But bread, no matter how blessed, did not last forever. Hunger circled the camp like a wolf with cold breath. It waited, patient, certain. By the 4th morning, Aidan's stomach growled loud enough to wake the goat. Isla's cheeks had grown hollow again, and Moira, though she never said a word, had taken to chewing on boiled nettle stems like they were roast goose. "We need meat," Adan said plainly as he tugged on his worn boots. "Something with bones." Moira looked at her son, really looked. His arms had lost their roundness. His knees stuck out when he knelt, but his eyes, those stayed sharp, bright as wet flint. She saw her husband in those eyes, the same kind of steadiness, the same stubborn light. "There's only one place to get meat this close," she said. Adan tilted his head. "Ewan's Croft?" Moira shook her head. "Further down in the hollow. The old smokehouse." Isla made a small sound in her throat. "You mean the one by the church ruins?" she asked. Moira nodded. "It was abandoned years ago, but the traps may still work. And if the wood's held, it'll be dry inside." "People say it's cursed," Isla said, more gently than fearful. "People say a lot of things." Moira replied. She was already gathering her things. The hollow where the smokehouse lay was a strange place. Sunlight rarely reached it. The trees crowded overhead like gossiping monks, and the soil stayed damp long after rain had passed. Even the birds seemed quieter there, their songs thinner somehow, like they didn't want to draw attention. The path there was twisted and narrow, not made by men, but worn into place by deer hooves and fox paws. Moira moved with care, Isla behind her, Adan bringing up the rear with a bow strung from willow and an arrow that had seen better days. The goat followed. Uninvited, as usual, Dot at the bottom of the slope. They paused. The smokehouse crouched at the edge of the trees, half sunken and crooked. Its roof sloped like a shoulder burdened too long. Built of thick logs blackened by smoke and weather, it looked less like a building and more like a warning. Moira approached first. Her fingers brushed the doorframe. Still firm, the iron latch rusted, but intact. She pushed gently, and the door creaked open with a sound like a groan. Inside, the air was heavy with the ghosts of 1,000 fires. The scent of old smoke clung to the rafters, to the cobwebs, to the bones of animals long gone. Strings still hung from the beams above, some frayed, some snapped, all swaying slightly even though the air was still. Moira stepped inside, knelt, and began to search. Behind her, Isla whispered, "Why did they leave this place?" "Hard winters," Moira replied, "and harder lords. Some places it was easier to walk away." She opened a wooden bin. Empty. Then another. A sack of salt, hard as stone, but salvageable. A length of rope. A small cleaver, rusted but usable. Adan found the trap still set, still baited, and inside, unbelievably, a rabbit, cold, dead, but not spoiled. He held it up triumphantly. "Looks like the gods haven't left yet." Moira allowed herself a smile. "Good. Let's take what we can and leave fast." They made camp near the stream that night, away from the grove. Moira cleaned the rabbit while Adan skinned it, awkward but learning. Isla gathered dry bark and herbs, whispering to herself as she moved something Moira didn't disturb. Fire hissed as fat hit the pan. The scent of meat drifted into the trees. The goat, annoyed it wasn't getting first bite, huffed and lay down with its back to them. They ate slowly, Dot silently, Dot chewing with their eyes closed. Each bite a memory in the making. Afterward, Moira tucked Aaron into a sling and sat staring at the coals. The children had wandered to the edge of the stream to skip stones. The world felt quieter here. She took the cleaver in her lap and rubbed its edge with a smooth river stone. Not sharpening, just touching, honoring Dot. Then she did something she hadn't done in months. She prayed, not to saints or angels, not to anything with a name, just to whatever still listened. Keep them warm, she murmured. Keep them fed. Let me be enough. Her voice didn't echo. The trees didn't answer. But something in her chest unclenched. That was enough. Later, as the stars began to prick the sky like frost on glass, Dan sat beside her. Will we ever go home again? He asked. Moira didn't look at him, just watched the fire. We are home, she said softly, wherever we are together. But the house was wood and stone. We are blood and breath. Which do you think lasts longer? Adan nodded, slowly. He didn't ask again. That night, something passed through the trees. Not a beast, not a man, just a shadow. Low, quick, gone before breath caught in the throat. Isla saw it. So did the goat, who stood suddenly head high, ears back, but nothing came closer. The fire held. The children slept. Moira did not. By morning, the sun was thin and uncertain, but warm enough to dry the mist off the grass. Moira boiled nettles for tea. Adan napped beside the goat. Isla bathed Aaron in a copper bowl by the stream, humming under her breath. The rabbit bones had been cleaned and carved into fish hooks. The cleaver now lived tucked into Moira's belt, and in her satchel, wrapped in cloth, was a handful of salt from the old SMOK, EHOUSE. Enough to cure the next bit of meat, enough to last just a little longer. Before they left, Moira walked alone back to the SMOKEHO. She stood in the doorway, listening. Then she reached up to the beam where the strings still swayed, and she tied a single braid of her hair to the lowest one. A gift, a thanks, a promise, and a prayer. The first real frost came during the night. It crept in quietly, draping everything in a veil of glass. Leaves turned brittle. Branches whispered under their own weight. The grass by the stream sparkled under the moonlight, as if someone had scattered crushed stars across the ground. The smoke from the fire rose thin and white, disappearing into the sky before it could form a proper cloud. Moira woke with a shiver in her bones. Not a startled kind of waking, just the slow, cold truth pressing against her spine and nudging her gently into the world. She looked around their camp. The children still slept, curled tight under the patchwork blanket Isla had stitched from strips of ruined clothing. Adan had his hand resting on the baby's belly, and the goat lay curled behind them all, breathing in soft huffs, steam rising from its nostrils. It would not be warm again soon. Not for months. Moira stood and pulled her shawl tighter. Her breath puffed in front of her like a second spirit. She walked a few paces away from the fire and scanned the trees. They were too exposed here. The wind had shifted. It no longer whispered, but whined. It came from the north, harsh and sharp. She'd lived long enough in these parts to know what it meant. A storm was coming. Not just snow, but a long freeze, a deep one. The kind that sealed doors shut and turned breath into icicles. The kind that made fingers black and crumbled stone. Walls under the weight of silence. They needed shelter. Real shelter. And soon. She remembered the cave. It wasn't far. No more than a half-day's walk. if the ground stayed firm. She'd seen it once years ago when she was a girl gathering mushrooms with her cousin. A shadowed mouth in the side of a cliff, half hidden by a thicket of blackthorn. The air near it had smelled of damp lichen and thyme. Her cousin had refused to go near it, claiming it was a troll's den, but Moira had always believed differently. The cold didn't scare her. It was the silence that made her cautious. Still, caves held warmth when nothing else did. The earth below didn't freeze the way the air above did. With a bit of luck, there would be space inside. Dry stone. Maybe even a chimney vent for a small fire. It was worth the risk. They would go at first light. The journey was slower than she hoped. Erin fussed against her chest. Not crying, just restless. Isla had taken on most of the carrying, her arms filled with bundles of dried moss, nettle rope, and the iron pot with its cracked lid. Adan walked ahead, his willow bow in one hand, the smokehouse cleaver sheathed in a rope sling across his. Rack, the goat, trailed behind, limping slightly but still moving. The air felt thicker the closer they got. Heavier. The trees changed too. More conifers, now pines and firs, their needles forming dark carpets beneath their feet. The forest smelled. Sharper, more alive somehow, more watchful. They paused at the foot of the cliffs. Moira remembered this place. A small stream trickled down over rocks, frozen in thin sheets. The blackthorn was still there, tangled and grim, its thorns longer than her finger. But behind it, if one looked just so, the mouth of the cave waited, wide enough to crouch through, tall enough for a child to stand inside. She went first. The air inside was cold, but not biting. It smelled of old things. Damp stone, leaf mold, a hint of ash, maybe. Someone had been here before, though long ago. A circle of blackened rocks lay near the center of the chamber, and bits of brittle straw suggested someone once tried to sleep here. Moira walked slowly, testing each step. The ground was uneven but solid. A narrow tunnel opened to the left, possibly leading deeper. But for now, this main chamber would do. The roof curved above like the belly of a sleeping beast, and a thin line of daylight near the back suggested there was a natural chimney. They could light a fire here. It wasn't perfect, but it was safe. She called the others in. Isla ducked through first, eyes wide. Then Adan, dragging the goat by its collar. They set their things down and stood in silence for a moment, letting the dark adjust around them. "It smells strange," Isla whispered. "It smells dry," Moira replied. They unpacked quickly. Blankets spread, stones cleared, a shallow pit dug for the fire. Adan and Isla worked with practiced hands now, and Moira felt something in her chest pride, maybe, or sorrow. It was hard to tell them apart these days. She lit the fire. It took 3 tries. The smoke curled up through the chimney gap and vanished. The fire caught. Warmth returned. And so for the first time in days they sat still, not hiding, not running. Just being. That night they ate the last of the oat cakes and the final strip of dried rabbit. They shared 2 turnips between them, boiled with a sliver of wild garlic Moira had found on the trail. It was thin fare, but warm. Afterward, Adan drew on the cave walls with a bit of burnt wood. A tree, a goat, a house with crooked windows. Erin watched, giggling. Isla told her. Story in whispers, a tale about a fox who wore boots and married a squirrel with a golden ribbon. Moira listened as she mended the strap on her satchel. Fingers sore but steady. Dot, it felt like home. Strange, but true. Later, while the others slept, Moira sat near the cave mouth, looking out at the stars. The night was clear, cold, beautiful. She thought of the old hearth back in the cottage, the way the fire danced in the soot-stained stone, the smell of peat and dried heather. She thought of her husband's boots by the door, and the way he used to hum while fixing the fence posts. She didn't cry, but the silence in her chest ached. Dot from her pocket. She pulled the little horn comb, the one her mother gave her as a girl. She held it up to the starlight. The carved horses were still there, running, leaping. "Free, Dot," she whispered to it. "Keep running." Then she tucked it away again and fed another stick to the fire. Dot in the early morning hours. Something woke her. Sound. Not loud, just wrong. Dot, she froze, every muscle listening. The wind outside had stilled. But there just beyond the entrance a crunch of snow, a shifting, a pause. She reached for the cleaver and moved to block the children with her body. The goat stood, ears flat. Then came a snort, a deer, a young stag, its antlers barely formed. It stood in the clearing, steam rising from its nostrils, eyes reflecting the firelight like twin moons. Dot, it watched her. Dot, then bowed its head slightly and walked away. Moira exhaled, deep and slow. Not everything that found you in the night meant harm. Dot, by the time morning came, the cave no longer felt like a hiding place. Dot, it felt like a shelter. Dot, not perfect, but enough. Adon's drawing of the crooked house had a new picture beside it now, 4 stick figures, one with a baby and a goat beside them, all standing beneath a curving line. A cave. He'd written the word home beneath it. The cave held Dot for 7 days and 7 nights. It kept them from the storm. Dot, outside, the Highlands vanished beneath a blinding weight of white. The trees became ghosts. The hills wore heavy silence like a shroud. Even the wind, normally so eager to howl, found itself muted by snow. Dot, inside the cave, life shrank to firelight and breath. Time bent inward. They no longer measured it in hours or days, but in repetitions. Wake, stir the embers, feed the baby, mend a seam, nap, stoke the fire again. The cold had a way of teaching rhythm. You learned to move slow, conserve heat, and always sleep curled into one another like spoons in a drawer. Food ran thin. Dot, by the 4th day, they had eaten the last of the nettle roots. By the 6th, even the goat was eyeing the mossy patches clinging to the cave wall like a connoisseur. Still, they endured. Adon carved sticks into toy soldiers for Erin, who giggled at them even as her cheeks grew pale. Isla began to hum whenever she worked, soft and tuneless, but calming. Moira watched them all with the eyes of a mother and a map-maker, always charting their weariness, their hunger, their hope. She knew it would not last. Dot, the cold was one enemy, but hunger. Hunger was the traitor that lived among them. On the morning of the 8th day, the snow eased. Moira stood at the cave mouth, bundled in every scrap of wool and leather they owned. Her breath fogged before her in heavy clouds. The forest beyond glittered, not like diamonds, but like bones sharp and waiting. She didn't want to leave, but she had to. There was an old bothy 2 hills east, little more than a pile of half-fallen stone with a chimney, and a single beam of roof left. The last time she passed it, there had been a wood pile, half covered. If the snow hadn't buried it, and if some beast hadn't nested in the timbers, there might still be something there. Bread, maybe, or a squirrel. She packed light. Just the cleaver, the willow bow, and a scrap of dried bread crust for the road. You can't go alone, Isla said as Moira laced her boots. I must. I'll come, Adon volunteered, already reaching for the rope sling. No, Moira said firmly. You're to keep the fire, keep your sister fed. And if I don't return by sunset, you'll return. There was no room for arguing in his voice, just belief. A simple kind. The kind only a child could give without demand. Moira touched his cheek. Then she turned and vanished into the snow-light. The world outside was not the world. She'd known it was blinding, infinite, a white sheet draped over the body of the land. Trees stooped under their burden. Streams whispered beneath ice. Even her own footsteps felt unfamiliar soft, sinking, then gone. She followed no path, only instinct and memory. The bothy stood near a ruined pine. Lightning struck, its bark blackened and flayed. She spotted it from the ridge just a sagging. Shadow huddled against the drift. For a moment she thought it had fully collapsed, but as she approached, she saw the chimney still stood, and mercifully the woodpile too. She reached it on stiff legs, breathing hard. The snow was up to her knees. Her shawl had crusted over with frost, but she reached for the top log, pulled it free-dry. Light, usable. She let out a shaky laugh. Not because it was funny, but because it meant one. More day. Inside the bothy was colder than the cave, but it was shelter. Moira stacked the wood and broke off a splinter for kindling. She knelt, fingers fumbling at the flint. The spark caught. The fire rose. Small, sullen, but alive. She opened the pouch at her belt. Only flour dust. But there, beneath a loose stone, a jar. She pried it free with the cleaver. It was sealed with beeswax and rag faded with age. She opened it carefully. Lard. Old. A bit. Gray, but not rancid. Her heart thud. Ded. She found a bowl behind the chimney, warped but intact. In it she mixed melted snow, a handful of ash from the hearth, and the last of her flour scrapings. The lard made it cling. It formed a paste, not quite dough, not quite soup, but it would bake. She lined a flat stone with pine needles, scooped the mixture onto it and set it near the fire. Ash bread. The food of the desperate, but food none the less. She returned to the cave as the sun bled orange along the treetops. The fire was low, but not out. Adon had kept it well. The goat bleated in greeting. Isla took the bundle from Moira's arms, bread, pine needles, and half-melted snow in a leather pouch. They ate in silence. No one complained. Not even the baby. The bread tasted of smoke and bark and faint bitterness, but it filled the hollows, and that was enough. That night, as they slept, Moira dreamed of her mother's kitchen. Warm brick walls, loaves rising on the hearthstone, her father whistling off-key while gutting a fish. She sat on the floor, cradling a ball of dough, shaping it into a lopsided heart. When she woke, her cheeks were wet. She didn't wipe them. Some griefs were worth. Remembering. Snow continued the next morning. Not hard, just steady. but it brought with it the crows. 3 of them, black specks against the white. They landed near the cave mouth and stood in a line, watching. Adon reached for his bow. "No," Moira said. "Let them look." "Why?" "Because they're clever. And they'll remember." He didn't understand not fully, but he lowered the bow by the 3rd day. The snow began to melt drip by drip. The trees sighed. Patches of brown earth peeked through the white. The fire no longer smoked as heavily. The cave felt less like a coffin and more like a cradle. Moira sat by the mouth and watched the forest breathe. Again, she had saved them for now. But spring was still far off, and there were many more days to come. She stood slowly. Her joints cracked. She picked up the comb, her mother's, and ran it once through her hair. It caught on a knot. She didn't mind. Then she turned to Adon. "We'll hunt tomorrow," she said. "Together?" She nodded. He grinned. And behind them, Isla laughed as Aaron tried to crawl across a blanket. The cave held. The bread held. The family held. And somewhere deep in the heart of the Highlands, the world waited silent and old and watching. They woke to the hush that only follows snowfall, the kind of silence that stretches across hills and treetops, soft and deliberate, as though the whole of the Highlands had paused to breathe. In the mouth of the cave, a strip of daylight filtered in, pale and cold as morning milk. It lit the frost-rimmed edge of the hearthstone, and the curls of steam rising from the damp wool hanging over the fire. Adon was already awake, seated cross-legged by the entrance. The bow rested across his lap. He had not yet grown into it his. Shoulders still narrow, his grip still unsure, but his gaze was steady, alert, watching. Moira joined him with a mug of nettle tea, cupped in her hands. "Anything moving?" He nodded toward the far slope. "Tracks. What kind?" He hesitated. Heavy, deep, too big for deer, longer stride than fox. She didn't ask again. Her face did the math in silence. Wolf. The snow had brought hunger with it, not just for people. Moira crouched by the entrance, brushing a strand of hair from her cheek with the back of her wrist. Her hands smelled of wood smoke and boiled nettles. "Any sign it's circled?" "No." "Then it's hunting." He looked up at her, something between fear and excitement flickering in his eyes. "You've never seen one," she said. He shook his head. "Heard them, once. You'll smell it before you see it? If we're lucky, we'll smell it first. And if not," she handed him the tea, "we won't be unlucky, not today." Later that morning, after a breakfast of crumbled ash bread and boiled roots, Moira and Adon set out. Isla stayed behind in the cave. Baby Aaron bundled tight against her chest. The goat curled up beside them like a grumpy dog. Moira had taught Isla how to tend the fire, what to do if something went wrong, where to hide if something worse did. Isla hadn't asked questions. She just nodded, her hands tightening over the baby's blanket. Outside, the snow had begun to soften underfoot. Each step left a print, crisp-edged and deep. Adon stopped now and again to examine droppings, bent reeds, and scratches on the bark signs of rabbit, deer, and once the faint drag of something heavier. "I want to trap something," he said. "You will," Moira replied. "Soon?" Patience is part of the trap. They didn't speak much as they walked. The woods here were different, older. The air hung heavier, and the light filtered through the trees like thin soup. A path twisted through the thickets, though it was barely visible under the snow. Moira remembered it from years ago, used once by traders carrying salt and cloth through the valleys before the roads fell to ruin. Now it led only to memory. And to the bell. They reached it before midday. The bell stood in a clearing, hung from a rotted frame of oak beams lashed with iron bands. It had once belonged to a chapel, though the stones of that building had long since been stolen, toppled, or buried beneath roots. All that remained was the bell and the hush around it. It didn't ring anymore. The clapper had been stolen or lost. A ragged scarf of ivy wrapped around its bronze belly, the color of old pennies. Moira approached it slowly, brushing snow from the wooden beam. What was it for? Aidan asked. To call the faithful, to warn of storms, to tell time. She paused. Some say it warned of wolves. He stepped closer, peering up at it. Does it still work? Moira reached up and tapped it with the tip of her cleaver. A dull, tired tone rang out. Faint, hollow, but still a voice. That'll carry, she said softly, if there are ears to hear it. She turned and scanned the tree line. Nothing moved. No tracks. No fresh scent, yet something in her gut stirred like a branch, snapping far away. She didn't like it. They set snares by the edge of the clearing. Simple things looped cord. Bent branch, a bait of roots. Aidan worked with focused silence, his fingers red and stiff but determined. He tested each loop twice, adjusted his knots, brushed away his own footprints. You've done this before, Moira said, surprised. Ewan taught me. Said if you don't know how to catch what runs, you'll die on your feet. Wise man. Aidan grinned, just slightly. They made 4 snares in total, spaced evenly along the clearing's edge, then covered them with soft branches and snow. It was good work. Not rushed. Careful. Let's check them at dusk, Moira said. But the wolf? It hunts on 4 legs, not 2. It'll pass by if it doesn't smell blood. And for now they carried none. On the walk back, they found the wolf track. Broad, deep, leading west. It had passed close, almost beside the snare trail, but not through it. Moira knelt beside the print, measured it with her hand. Large. A loner. Perhaps, or a scout. She rubbed snow between her fingers, cold, dry, good for hiding, bad for scent. They moved faster after that. That night, the fire burned lower. They had to save wood. Aidan sat sharpening the tip of a branch into a spear. Isla, humming again as she braided thin cords for future traps. The baby slept curled into Moira's lap, her breath warm against her ribs. The cave felt tighter than usual. Heavier. Moira couldn't stop thinking of the bell, of how hollow it had sounded. Of how loud it might still ring, given the right strike. At midnight, the goat stood up. That alone would not have mattered. But then it hissed. Not a bleat. Not a grunt, a warning. Moira's opened her eyes. So did Aedan. So did Isla. The fire flickered. Outside crunching snow. Low, deliberate. A shadow passed the mouth of the cave. Not close enough to see, but close enough to feel. A shape, a silence, a hunger. Moira reached for the cleaver. Aidan held the half-finished spear like it might save his breath. Then the shape paused. Breath. Then it passed. Gone. The goat lay down again. No one slept after that. At dawn. The snow had stilled. The They returned to the bell clearing in silence. 2 traps had sprung. One held a rabbit, the other nothing. The loop was torn, frayed, as though something had chewed its way free. Moira crouched beside it, Dot in the snow. Prints, wider than a rabbit, smaller than a man. Wolf. Adan swallowed hard. He was watching, or just passing, but he knew. Moira didn't argue. She reset the trap with quieter hands. They returned to the cave with a rabbit wrapped in Moira's shawl. Dot, it was small. Not enough for 4, but it was meat. They roasted it with pine, bark, and a single turnip. Even the goat got a bite. Afterward, as night fell, Moira stepped outside the cave. She stood in the snow, looked up at the pale winter moon. Then she did something she hadn't done in years. She whispered Dot to the wind, Dot, too. The wolf, Dot, to the bell. Watch us, but let us be. And in return, the trees said nothing. But the night did not press closer. The frost was lifting, but the ground still cracked underfoot like old bones. Each morning now, a thin film of meltwater glittered across the stones near the cave's mouth, disappearing by noon as the sun pushed weakly through the gray. It was not warmth exactly, but it was change. And in the Highlands, change could be as dangerous as cold. Moira knew this. The wolf had not returned. Not openly, but the goat refused to sleep near the entrance anymore. It kept itself folded near the fire, eyes half-lidded, chewing at shadows. Adan took to sharpening his spear 3 times a day. Ayla no longer hummed. The food stores were bone-thin. Only a single turnip remained, soft at the top. The snare traps near the bell had gone untouched for 3 days. Even the birds seemed to have retreated somewhere deeper, beyond the hills, beyond the hunger. Moira looked at the baby Erin's cheeks, sunken now, though her eyes still followed the firelight, and made a decision. She would go to the widow's. The widow had been old even when Moira was a girl. Her name had been Catriona, but no one called her that. Just the widow, as if her state of loss had overtaken her name completely. She had lived in a small stone croft near the base of the far ridge, just where the birch trees thinned and the heather grew thick and woolly. People said she was a healer. Others said she was a witch. Moira didn't care which she was. Widow had a root cellar, Dot, and Moira needed roots. She left before dawn. The others stayed behind, huddled near the cave fire. She gave Ayla a knife and Adan a warning. Don't light a second fire unless it's life or death. And if you hear footsteps, you wait until you see who they belong to. They both nodded, but Moira saw the fear behind the eyes, the rising knowledge that every journey now had risk tied to it like a stone. Still, she walked Dot down into the tree-thick valley, across the stream where the ice had cracked into mirrored shards. The wind tugged at her sleeve like a child asking questions. The sun hovered above the ridgeline, too pale to be called gold. She passed places she remembered. A broken fence, a well gone dry, a row of hazel saplings once planted by a family whose names she no longer knew. All of it quiet, all of it claimed by time. The widow's croft appeared just past noon, still standing, crooked, tired, but standing. Moss had grown thick across its roof, and smoke no longer rose from the chimney. The door hung open, swinging slightly with each breath of wind. Not in welcome, Dot in warning. Moira entered slowly. The air inside was still, thick. not foul but old. A hush pressed against her ears like wool stuffed too deep. The hearth had long since gone cold. The bed was bare, the quilt folded at its end, as if the widow had left on purpose. The windows were fogged with dust. On the table sat a single clay bowl with a cracked rim, inside it dried berries, possibly edible, but Moira wasn't here for the berries. She crossed to the back wall. There, hidden beneath a woven mat, she found the cellar door. It creaked. She lifted it with both hands, slowly, muscles trembling not with strain but with knowing. She had dreamed of this root cellar, not once, but many times. Always dark, always waiting, a wooden ladder descended into the earth. The smell rose up to meet her, dirt, mold, damp straw, and underneath it, parsnip, turnip, something onion sweet. Still there, still whole. She descended. The light was poor. She used a bit of lichen-wrapped fire starter to ignite a small taper, holding it in one hand as she moved past the shelves. Most were bare, but a few held what she'd hoped. Shriveled roots still tied in bunches, cured herbs, 2 jars of pickled garlic, and bless the old woman's foresight. Small sack of barley. She nearly wept, but she did not stop. She gathered what she could carry, wrapping each carefully in cloth. As she lifted a bundle of dried mint from a low shelf, something shifted behind her, a scraping. Moira turned. Nothing. But her flame fluttered. The air had changed. Someone or something was here. She listened. The silence was too round, too clean. No rats, no insects. No breath but hers, then a cough. From the far end of the cellar. She froze and waited. Another cough. Dry. Weak. She lifted her taper higher. There, in the shadowed corner, was a bedroll, and in it, curled like an old cat, the widow. She was thinner than Moira remembered. Her hair, once thick and white, now hung in strands like frostbitten wool. Her eyes were open, barely. You came late, she rasped. Moira dropped to her knees beside her. You're alive, the widow smiled barely. Mostly. What happened? Didn't leave in time. Thought the trees would hold. Moira reached for her water flask, held it to the woman's lips. I didn't come for you, she whispered. I came for food. Of course you did. They both laughed. A small, terrible sound. Moira looked at the shelves again, then back at the woman. I'll come back, she said. Bring help. There's no time. There is. We can carry you. No. The widow's hand gripped her wrist. Take the roots. Take the barley. And take this. She reached into the bedroll, pulled out a small iron bell. Old. Simple. Cold to the touch. Moira took it. What is it? Protection. Maybe. Or maybe just noise. Her voice thinned. Hang it above your door. Or your fire. Or your heart. I don't. Take it. Moira did. The widow closed her eyes and exhaled. Once. And then no more. It was full dark when Moira climbed from the root cellar. She did not look back. She left the door open, letting the cold and the stars bury what they would. The path home felt longer, but she did not stumble. The bell hung from her pack, silent and heavy. They met her at the edge of the cave, arms wide, eyes wide. Breath-catching. Isla took the baby and held her close. Haydan took the pack and opened it. With careful hands. Roots. Barley. Garlic. Bread for a week. Soup for longer, and the bell. Moira held it up to the firelight. Aidan touched it. "It's cold." "It will warm," Moira whispered. Then she tied it with nettle cord and hung it above the hearth, where it swayed slightly with the heat. No sound. Just promise. That night they ate turnip stew thickened with barley. The baby slept without stirring, even the goat read. And in the flickering light of the cave, the bell caught the glow once, just once, and glimmered like a star pinned to the stone. The storm had passed, but the cave had not forgotten. Each creak of melting ice from the trees, each whistle of the wind through high branches, made the stones tremble slightly like a house still bracing for a blow it never received. Inside the cave things were quieter, warmer, more certain, but not yet safe, not truly. Moira stirred the pot gently. Barley bubbled near the surface, slow and steady, with slivers of wild garlic and the faint sweetness of the widow's turnip curling. Upward in the steam, the smell filled the chamber like comfort, earthy, smoky, real. Isla sat with baby Aaron on her lap, humming again, her voice a thread weaving through the shadows. Aidan sat by the wall, carving notches into a stick, one for each day they'd been in the cave. He was up to 24. The goat watched him, chewing quietly, its one good eye glinting in the firelight. Moira ladled stew into clay cups and handed them out one by one, careful not to spill. They all ate in silence, chewing, slowly staring into the flames as though they might speak. It wasn't joy. Not exactly but it was enough. That evening, Aidan asked about the bell. "Why did she give it to you?" Moira stirred the coals gently. "She said it was protection." "From what?" She looked toward the cave mouth, where the dark pressed in like a patient tide from whatever listens when we don't. Aidan said nothing, but he looked up at it swinging gently on its nettle cord, catching flickers of orange firelight. It had not rung once, and Moira hadn't tested it. She didn't want to know what sound it might make. Some things, she believed, were meant to wait. It was that night-long past when they should have been asleep that the fire changed. Moira had just doused the last coals and pulled a blanket over her shoulders. Isla was already snoring softly, the baby curled beneath her arm, a small patch of drool wetting the wool. Then a glow, not orange, not fire. Blue. Soft. Pale. It flickered across the back of the cave like candlelight through a bottle, strange, cold, beautiful. Moira sat upright. Aidan, too, had seen it. He didn't speak, just reached for the spear. They followed the light, not far, just to the far chamber, an alcove they hadn't explored yet, too small, too tight. But now it glowed. Inside, the stone walls shimmered faintly. A thin crack ran across the back wall, and from it the light pulsed like breath. Aidan reached out to touch it. "Don't," Moira said. "Why not?" "Because some lights weren't made for seeing." He pulled back. They waited. The light faded. Moira stepped forward, pressed her ear to the crack. No sound, but her heart beat faster. She'd heard of such things. The night fire. It was an old tale, one her mother had whispered when she was young, of stone that held fire not from this world, but from the one beneath. It fire that didn't burn, but remembered, a flicker of ancient heat left over from the shaping of the earth. Harmless, some said. Others claimed it drew things to it, creatures, spirits, hungers with no name. Moira didn't believe all of that, but she believed in watching Dot and in leaving such places alone. They sealed the alcove with stone and dried moss, Dot, and didn't speak of it again. The next day the bell rang. Not loud, Dot, not frantic, Dot, just once, a single, clear chime that echoed gently through the cave like a thought someone had said aloud by mistake. Moira froze, mid-step. Aiden looked up from the fire. Isla held the baby tighter. Outside. All was still. They waited. Nothing followed. No. Breath. No footstep. No howl. Just silence. Maybe it was the wind, Isla offered. Moira nodded. But she didn't believe it. Later that evening, Moira left the cave alone. The snow had melted into patches, revealing wet earth and bones of old branches. The sky was streaked with streaks of dull red, as though the sun had bled out as it left the world. She climbed to the ridge and waited. Beneath her, the forest exhaled. And in the far distance, over the second hill, where the old trail curved. Toward the forgotten priory she saw it. Fire, not the kind you built for warmth, but a signal, a line of orange dancing across the trees. Someone else was out there, or something. She watched it burn until the dark took it back, then returned to the cave. Was it a raid? Adan asked. No. A hearth? No. Then what? Moira looked at him, the answer hard in her throat. I don't know. They set no traps the next day. Too risky. Instead, they stayed close, boiled roots, scrubbed blankets, dug a deeper waste pit. Normal things, useful things, but beneath it all was a waiting, a slow awareness. Something had changed, and that night the bell rang again. Once. Twice. Then silence. Moira sat up all night, staring at it. She didn't speak, didn't pray, just waited. But nothing came. On the fourth day, they found the trail. A single boot print in the half-melted snow. Fresh. Not soldier. Too light. Too small. And beside it a handprint. Not pressed in fear or collapse. Deliberate. As though someone had crouched and watched. The trail led west toward the old priory ruins. Moira did not follow. Not yet. That night the fire burned low. The stew was thin. The baby fussed in her sleep, but they were warm, they were alive, and the bell stayed still until, just as Moira drifted off, it chimed. Once. But not in warning. This time it sounded like invitation. The bell had not chimed again by morning. It hung where Moira had tied it, motionless and dull, as if it had never spoken at all. But they had all heard it. The single tone had clung to their sleep, echoing through dreams like a whisper from stone. Even the goat had stirred. No one mentioned it. Not at breakfast, which consisted of a handful of barley soaked overnight in nettle tea. Not when Moira boiled water for washing. Not when Adan stepped outside to check the traps and found nothing. Not even footprints this time. The silence was its own answer. Something waited out there. By mid-morning, Moira knew she could no longer ignore the path. It had been there since before she was born. Before her mother, before even the stories. A narrow, crumbling trail that wound up the western slope, through twisted trees and forgotten shrines, leading to the ruins of a priory lost so long ago its name had been worn away by wind. They called it the Path of Cracked Saints, not because the saints themselves were broken, but because the statues of them were carved into cliff faces and stumps tucked into the roots of old trees. Each was a figure once beloved, now chipped and weathered. Their hands had fallen off. Their faces were worn down to smooth ovals. Their stone robes hung like ghost shadows. On the bark dot it was said the path was holy, or cursed dot, or both. But Moira didn't believe in curses. She believed in what she could carry, and she believed in signs dot. So when the bell rang twice, once as she tied her cloak, and again as she stepped from the cave, she understood she must go. She left the cave before noon, wrapped in 2 shawls and a wool hood, the cleaver at her belt, a pouch of dried mint in one hand. Isla stayed behind with Aaron and Aidan. They, goat, to no one's surprise, tried to follow. Moira led it. The snow had mostly receded now, leaving behind marsh and broken twigs. The path, once hidden, had reappeared, not clearly, but just enough. A faint line through the forest. Old boot prints, nearly lost to time, guided her. The cracked saints were there, too. The first stood beside a bent birch, his head missing but one hand still raised in a blessing. The second lay half buried in brambles, a woman holding a bird whose beak had been chipped away. The third was almost hidden behind moss, eyes worn blank by wind, arms open as if waiting for someone who never came. Moira passed each one with a nod, not out of reverence, but out of understanding. Even the sacred broke, and still they remained. The climb was longer than she remembered. Her knees ached. Her breath steamed. The goat huffed beside her, stepping carefully, as if it, too, sensed the change in the air. The forest grew quieter as they climbed. No birds, no wind dot, just the sound of boots in mud and the faint chime of her satchel bell with each step. Then she reached the tree, reached dot, and saw the priory. Dot, it wasn't a building anymore. Dot, just outlines, stone bones wrapped in ivy. Archways collapsed into heaps. A well with no rope. Walls half standing, each stone blackened with time. And in the center, just where the altar might once have been, a tree had grown. Thin, crooked, reaching straight upward as though trying to pierce the sky itself. Stepped inside what had once been the nave. Snow crunched beneath her boots. Somewhere above a crow called once, then fell silent. She wasn't alone. Someone had been here. She found the signs quickly. An old cloak, stiff with cold. A basket. A crust of bread that hadn't yet molded. A trail of boot prints leading behind. The apse into a shadowed space between 2 collapsed walls. She followed. He was sitting on a flat stone, his back to her, legs drawn up to his chest. His hair was gray, his shoulders thin. He turned when he heard her. Not startled, just slow, eyes the color of old bark. A face with hollows, with lines etched from wind and grief. Moira said nothing. Neither did he. The silence between them filled the whole ruined dot at last. He spoke. "You came by the bell." She nodded. Dot. He held something in his hands, a small, flat disk of stone, carved long ago with the faint shape of a cross. "She gave this to me," he said. "The widow." Moira's breath caught. "You knew her?" He looked up. "She was my sister." The wind stirred at that moment. Moira sat on the opposite stone. "She's gone," she said. He closed his eyes. "I know. I heard the bell." They sat for a long time. Then he reached into his cloak and handed her something. A small pouch, tied with blue thread. She left this for you." Moira took it, opened it. Inside dash salt. Real salt, white, clean, dry, and a second bell. Smaller. Brass. No cord. Just the bell. 2 bells, she whispered. "Balance," he said. Then he stood. "You won't see me again." She didn't argue. He turned and walked back through the ruins, into the trees, until the forest swallowed him. She returned to the cave by nightfall. Aidan was waiting at the entrance. "I heard something," he said. "So did I," Moira replied. Inside, the baby was sleeping. Isla was boiling water. Moira hung the second bell beside the first. Neither rang. But the air shifted. Just slightly. As though something had settled, or someone had passed through. That night, they ate turnip broth. Moira added a pinch of the widow's salt. The flavor bloomed in their mouths like memory. And when they lay down to sleep, the goat curled at their feet, and both bells glimmered gently in the fireigt. Silent. For now. The wind returned 3 days later. Not the howling, biting wind of a coming storm, no. This wind was different. It came quietly, curling through the cave like a finger drawn across the surface of water. It didn't roar. It whispered. It didn't. Presset watched. And for the first time in weeks, Moira felt as though the world had turned its face toward them again, not in anger, not in pity, but in recognition. She was standing at the cave mouth when it arrived. The day had been still. The air hung flat over the hills, thick with old smoke and moss. She'd been gathering dry grass for kindling, pressing the stems into tight twists, when the breeze shifted. A soft breath down from the north, cool and clean. She closed her eyes, and she remembered. Salt wind across the bay at Glenmore. The way the sea pushed its scent into your lungs, whether you wanted it or not. She remembered her husband's laugh on the cliff top when the storm missed them by a mile. She remembered dancing just once barefoot on the moor when she was still young enough to believe there would always be more time. The memory was sudden. Sharp. But not unkind. She opened her eyes. The world had shifted. Just a little, but enough. The air smelled clearer. The trees no longer looked like watchers. They looked like guides. The wind was at her back now, and it was time to move forward. They spent that day gathering what remained. The cave had served them well. It had cradled them through the storm, through hunger, through silence. But spring would not come to a cave, not really. It would wait just outside its mouth, calling gently with green shoots and thawing streams. And if they stayed, they would miss it. We can't live in stone forever. Moira said that morning, quietly, to Isla. Isla had been folding cloth, repairing the last tear in the baby's blanket. She looked up, blinked, then nodded, not in fear, but in readiness. Even Aidan, when he heard, did not protest. He simply packed the spears more tightly, checked the flint, and whispered something to the goat. The bells above the hearth did not ring, but they swayed gently in the new wind, a kind of nod, a kind of yes. They walked out just before midday. The fire doused, the cave left clean behind them. Moira carried Aaron on her hip, bundled in wool and the widow's mended shawl. Isla bore the satchel, now lighter than ever, but steadier in her grip. Aidan led the way, his eyes scanning the thawed ground for fresh sign of animal, of man, of anything still living. The goat followed. Of course, they didn't know where they were going. But they weren't lost. There was a difference. The path. North had once been a cattle trail. Worn deep by hooves and years, it curved gently between two hills and dipped through an alder grove where moss grew thick enough to sleep on. Here the snow had retreated entirely, leaving behind a wet humus rich with scent and promise. They stopped near the stream to rest. Aaron gurgled softly, tugging at Isla's braid. Aidan drank from his hands, then helped Moira boil the last of the mint leaves into a weak tea. It tasted of old shoes, but it was warm. "Will we find people?" Isla asked. Moira considered. "Yes," she said. "Eventually. Good people?" "Some." Isla didn't push further. They knew. All of them. The world beyond the hills held no promises. Only options. You took what you could, gave what you must, and tried not to lose too much of yourself in the exchange. Still, it was better than waiting for hunger to return, or worse. That night, they camped beneath a fallen yew. Its limbs formed a kind of roof, and the bark was still fragrant, still red. Moira layered dry moss beneath their blankets, and Aidan dug a shallow fire pit, shielding the flame with stones. The goats stood watch. They didn't speak much, but they didn't need to. The stars were out again, real stars, not pinpricks glimpsed through smoke, but full and ancient. Moira leaned back against a tree and traced the lines between them, with her finger just as her father had done. "That one's the hammer," she murmured. Aidan looked. "I don't see it. It's broken now, but it used to be full." "Like the saints?" she smiled. "Exactly like the saints." Isla, already drifting off, whispered, "Then maybe we're all hammers, just missing a bit." Moira didn't reply, but her smile lingered long after the fire dimmed. They found the cart 3 days later, tipped on its side near a bend in the old road, half swallowed by brambles. The wheels were gone, likely stolen or broken, but the box had not yet been looted fully. Beneath a layer of hay, they found a sack of cracked barley, a folded length of canvas, and a small copper pan with a bent handle. "Treasure.aedan" cheered softly. Isla kissed the pan's handle and laughed. Moira said nothing, but she wrapped the barley in cloth and pressed it to her chest like a promise. Even the goat seemed pleased. They made camp nearby, warmed the pan over the fire, and ate the last of the old stew with the smell of copper and hope in the air. That night, for the first time in a long time, Moira dreamed of bread, real bread, with salt and heat and a crust so crisp it cracked when you touched it. She woke hungry and unafraid. On the 5th day, the road led them to the clearing. It wasn't much, just a flat piece of land beside a river bend, ringed with birch and fir, sheltered from the wind, but the soil was soft. The water ran clean, and a circle of stones suggested someone had once built a fire here long ago. Not a campfire. A hearth. Moira stood in the center of it, turned slowly, felt the earth beneath her feet. She looked to Isla, to Aidan. "Here," she said. "Just for the night?" Isla asked. Moira shook her head. "No, for a little longer than that." They unpacked slowly. Moira dug the fire pit anew. Aidan stacked rocks into a low wall. Isla gathered branches and began to weave them together with stringy vines her fingers, moving confidently. Even Aaron gurgled and kicked her feet, delighted to be off the trail. The goat wandered a few paces off, found a bush to nibble, and settled in as if it had always lived there. They didn't say it aloud, but they knew this was not home, but it was a place, and sometimes that was more than enough. That night the wind shifted again. It curled through the branches overhead and pulled smoke gently toward the stars. Moira sat by the fire with the baby in her lap. Aidan slept beside the stone wall. Isla was still awake, humming low and wordless. Moira looked to the sky, closed her eyes, and whispered, "Thank you, not to a god, not to a saint, but to the wind, to the cracked path, to the cave that it held. Then, to the bells that had warned them, to the woman who had died alone, so that others might eat, to her husband, who had never returned from the last winter's snow, to herself." When she opened her eyes again, the fire had dimmed to embers. Baby slept, cheek against her shoulder, and the wind, gentle, now brushed her hair like a friend, saying, "You've done well." They saw him first from the far side of the river, on a morning when mist lay heavy over the valley like wool pulled tight across a sleeping face. The water moved slow and gray, curling around frost-glazed stones as the sun tried and failed to burn through the sky's indifference. Moira was kneeling at the bank, her hands deep in the shallows as she washed a strip of cloth. Aidan sat nearby sharpening a stick into a fishing spear, the goat hovering behind him like a half-forgotten memory. The figure on the opposite bank did not announce himself. He simply appeared. One moment there was only fog and fir branches, then suddenly a man, tall perhaps, or lean, wrapped in layers of tattered wool and a long cloak that reached the tops of his muddy boots. He stood still for so long that Moira wasn't certain he was real. Only the faint glint at his waist gave him away. A small brass bell swinging gently from a leather strap. She didn't move. She let the cloth float in the shallows and rose slowly, her hands dripping. Aidan saw her expression and followed her gaze. Then he stood too, clutching the notched spear with both hands, shoulders squared. The man raised one hand in greeting. Not a wave, not a beckoning, just a still palm turned outward. It was a gesture of peace, perhaps, or of pause. They didn't speak across the water. Not yet. The sound of the current filled the silence between them, like words neither side was ready to say. Later, by the fire, Moira would wonder if she had known, even then, that he would cross, that the river wasn't deep enough to keep anything truly separate for long, and she would be right, by the time they saw him again. He was on their side. He came with the dusk, walking up the hill toward their camp without haste, not creeping, not cloaked in stealth, just walking as if the ground had remembered him and the trees had chosen not to whisper. The goat bleated once, more out of curiosity than alarm, then returned to its dinner of bramble tips. Aidan stepped forward first, spear still in hand. Isla stood behind the fire, clutching Aaron to her chest, eyes narrowed. Moira, without a word, rose from the stone where she had been mending a torn boot sole and turned to face the stranger. He stopped just shy of the fire's edge. His cloak was thick with mud, the color of riverbed and bark. His beard was short, his face wind-burnt, and his eyes, well, they were not kind, but they were not cruel either. They were just tired, like he'd been walking for a long time and hadn't spoken aloud for half of it. Moira looked at the bell. On his belt. "You came from the south?" she asked. He nodded once. His voice, when it came, was soft and rasped. "From the Priory. What's left of it." "I saw your fire," she said. "I meant it to be seen." Adan stepped closer. "Why?" The man looked at the boy and gave a dry smile. "Because people forget to look up when they're hiding." Moira tilted her head. "Are you looking for something?" He paused. Then, "For someone." She didn't. Ask who. That night, they let him share the fire. Not the circle, not the inner warmth where the baby lay curled and the goat made lazy chewing sounds. But near enough. He sat on the far edge, his back against a low stone, arms folded in his lap. The bell on his belt didn't ring once. He didn't offer a name. Moira didn't ask for one. She handed him a cup of barley, broth and a crust of ash, bread, and he accepted both with a quiet nod. Later, as the fire dimmed and the wind moved through the branches above like slow breath, he spoke again. "Only once. I lost my son last winter." Moira said nothing. The silence was not rude. It was. Shared a gift in the morning, he was still there not gone, not vanished like some wild dream. He was kneeling at the stream, just as Moira had done the morning before, washing his hands with the same care someone might use to scrub guilt from their fingers. She approached slowly, holding a wooden cup filled with mint tea. "Why the bell?" she asked. He looked up at her, the lines in his face clearer now. "It was his, my boy." She said nothing, just handed him the cup. He sipped and closed his eyes. The steam rose between them like incense. "I used to think bells were for calling things to you," he said, not looking at her. "People, spirits, saints. And now?" "Now I think they're for keeping things away." Moira nodded. "Both. Can be true." He opened his eyes and looked at her. Really looked, as though he was reading the shape of her life in her face. "You've lost people too." It wasn't a question. She answered anyway. Yes. The days that followed blurred. The man stayed, though he asked for nothing. He helped stack stones for a cooking circle, repaired one of the goat's fraying leg straps, and whittled a spoon for Isla so she could stop burning her fingers on the metal ladle. He told no stories. But he listened. Adnan began calling him. Bell, and the name stuck not mockingly, but simply because it was true. Bell spoke little, but watched much. He knew the signs of weather, knew how to tell which trees had rot beneath their bark, knew how to find dry wood after a night of rain. One morning he showed Adan how to follow the trail of a hare that had doubled back on itself. "You don't follow its steps," he explained. "You follow its fear." And somehow that made perfect sense. It was a week before he mentioned the Priory again. Moira was kneading a paste of barley and crushed sorrel, her hands coated in grit and green. Bell stood nearby, carving something from a bone, quiet, focused. "I buried him there," he said, as if picking up a sentence from 3 days ago. Moira looked up. "In the old nave, where the altar once stood, beneath the tree." She remembered the tree, thin and strange, growing upward from the Priory's ruined belly like a question. "You came all that way just to bury him?" she asked. Bell shook his head. "I came to say goodbye." She watched him for a long time. "You could stay?" "I might. Not forever." "No," he said. But a little longer. The bell on his belt still hadn't rung. But that night, as the wind picked up and clouds drifted low over the hills, it swung gently with each breath of the fire. A quiet clink, soft, easy, a note half-held like a promise left unfinished. And for the first time in a long time, Moira slept without dreaming. It began, as so many things did now, in silence. The sun had not yet risen. The sky was the pale gray of early spring, the color of wet ash and lingering frost. A thin mist had crept down from the ridges during the night, curling between the trees, and stones like it had been set with purpose. The fire had burned low, casting only a weak orange glow over the sleeping shapes, tucked beneath wool and woven cloth. And then the goat stood up Dot, not with a bleat, not with a grunt, simply it rose. Moira woke first. She didn't know why her eyes opened at that moment, only that something had shifted, a pressure, a hush inside the hush. She turned her head slowly and saw the goat at the edge of camp, stiff-legged, facing north. Its ears twitched. Its body held tight as if listening with every inch of fur and bone. The bells above the hearthstone swayed once. Gently, Dot no wind, but something was coming. She sat up and pulled her shawl close around her shoulders, moving carefully so as not to wake Aaron, who was still curled beside Isla in the blanket nest. Aidan stirred near the ash-cooled fire pit, rubbing his eyes, already reaching for his spear out of instinct more than fear. The goat stamped once, then turned Dot and walked, not away from camp, but around it, circling, slowly, deliberately. Moira followed, it with her eyes. Bell, who had taken to sleeping with his back against the wall of the half-built stone ring, opened one eye, then both. He didn't speak, just stood and mirrored Moira's gaze. She nodded once, and he moved. The others were still waking when the goat made its second lap around the camp. Its breath came in sharp puffs. Its ears were flat now. It didn't look. Back Dot, it stopped once, just once, by the pack, where Moira kept her tools. Then it lifted one leg and struck the leather sack with its hoof 3 times hard. Moira understood. She had learned long ago to listen when animals changed their rhythm. Dogs that stopped barking, crows that vanished from a field, goats that circled. Instead of sleeping, the land spoke. If you gave it time, Dot, and now it was saying, prepare, not run, Dot, not ride, Dot. Just prepare, Dot. By mid-morning the camp had shifted. Blankets were bundled, tools tied in tighter knots. The firewood stack doubled. The path to the river cleared of brush. A lookout post, just a low perch among 3 boulders, was rechecked, reinforced. They had lived long enough without walls. Now they made mental ones. Bell spent the afternoon gathering dry pine cones and tucking them into cloth pouches. When Isla asked why, he only said, they burn hot, fast, like a warning flare. Aidan asked if they were going to be attacked. No, Moira said without conviction. Then what? She looked to the trees. I don't know, but something's looking back. That night the goat did not sleep. It stood at the far side of camp, its one good eye watching the trees beyond the stream. It did not eat, did not chew, did not move, except to turn its head when the wind shifted. The bells did not ring, but Moira's dreams were full of them, clanging, muffled, distant, like someone ringing them under water, trying to warn a town too far away to hear Dot. She woke before dawn with sweat across her neck and the taste of ash on her tongue. The goat was still watching. On the third day, the footprints appeared, not near the camp. Not close, but near enough. Bell found them first while fetching water from the bend. In the river. Human. Barefoot. Fresh. They're watching us, he said simply, handing the flattened cup to Adan. Who? Isla asked. Bell only shrugged. Not wolves, not soldiers, someone older or someone lost. Moira looked down at the print. Long toes, deep heel. No tread. Not someone armed, but someone there. That night they did not light a fire. They sat close, wrapped in thick cloth, eating dried mash and whispering to each other beneath breath and stars. The bells remained still. The air was still. But the goat began to walk in a wider circle, twice around, then three. On the fourth lap, it stopped, faced the trees. And growled. A sound none of them had ever heard from it. Deep. Throaty. Aaron whimpered. Isla clutched her tighter. Adan moved toward the stone wall, and Moira rose. The trees remained silent. The wind did not speak, but Moira did. I know you're out there, she said to the dark, and I don't fear you. Not tonight. She didn't shout. She didn't challenge. It wasn't defiance. It was a promise. A naming, the fire within her steadier than the one they didn't dare light. In the morning, something had been left at the edge of camp. A bundle of twigs tied with nettle string. Wrapped in it, a fish already cleaned. Fresh, cold. And a single bell. Stone. Carved. Cracked. Moira picked it up and turned it in her hand. The string was rough, the carving shallow, rushed, but it was a bell nonetheless. She hung it on a branch above the wall and whispered, "We see you too." The birch trees marked the far edge of what Moira thought of the safe side. They grew in a gentle arc, their trunks white and clean, streaked with dark scars like they had been struck gently by a painter's brush. Beyond them the land sloped downward toward the stream, then vanished into tangled brush and darker woods, where the birds did not sing and the wind always felt just a little colder than it should. No one crossed the birch line unless there was a reason. It was Bell who saw the visitor first. He had risen before the others that morning, long before the sun found its way over the ridge. The coals in the fire pit were still warm, but not glowing, and the sky above was layered in soft gray sheets. He walked the edge of camp with slow steps, more out of habit than worry, his breath rising in small puffs as he passed beneath the birches. That's when he noticed it. A figure, seated not standing on a fallen log beneath the largest birch. Small, still, wrapped in too many layers for the time of year, as if expecting snow even though the frost had long since fled. The face was hidden, the head bowed, but the air around them was unmistakably human. No threat, but no invitation either. Bell didn't approach at once. He simply turned and walked calmly back to the camp, where Moira was feeding hot tea to Aaron with a wooden spoon. She looked up when she saw his expression. "Something?" she asked. He nodded once. "Someone." They didn't rush out instead. They made a quiet breakfast of boiled grains and dried berries, their movements careful, measured. Even Adan seemed to sense the shift in atmosphere. The bells above the fire pit swayed gently, though there was no breeze. as if acknowledging what waited at the boundary of their small world. When the time came, Moira didn't take anyone with her. She tied her shawl across her shoulders, adjusted her boots, and left the camp with quiet steps. The birches stood like pale sentinels as she passed through them, sunlight flickering through their branches in soft dapples. The figure on the log hadn't moved as she drew closer. She saw they were younger than she'd expected. A girl, perhaps 14, thin, fragile. Her cloak was made of mismatched bits of wool, linen, and something that might once have been a priest's robe. Her feet were bare. Her hair, what little escaped the hood, was black and matted. Moira stopped a few paces away. "You've been watching," she said gently. The girl didn't answer. Moira took a slow breath, kneeling in the wet grass so they were eye to eye. "We've seen your offerings, the fish, the bell. We weren't sure who left them." The girl looked up. Her eyes were startling, pale gray, too large for her face. "I thought you were dead," she whispered. Moira blinked. "Why?" "Because the cave people always die." There was no drama in her voice, just fact, like saying the sky is gray or the roots grow down. "I see," Moira said softly. "You've been alone a long time." The girl nodded. Moira offered a hand. "Come to the fire, eat, rest. No questions if you don't want them." The girl hesitated. Then, slowly, her fingers slipped into Moira's palm. Back at camp, no one stared. They made space. Isla fetched a blanket. Aiden gave her his cup of broth without being asked. Even the goat sniffed her hand and did not shy away. The girl said little. Her name was Lynn. That was all she offered. Not where she came from. Not how long she'd been in the woods. Just Lynn. She ate slowly, as if not used to food that stayed in the stomach. When she finished, she sat close to the fire and stared into it like she'd forgotten what warmth meant. That evening, Belle sat beside her and told a story, not one of war or kings, just a memory, of his son's laugh echoing across a frozen loch, of a loaf of bread that had fallen into the ashes but still been eaten, soot and all, of the way winter light made even broken things shine. Lynn didn't say anything, but she leaned her head gently against his shoulder and closed her eyes. That night the wind rose again. Gentle, but not idle. The bells above the hearthstone rang once, soft as breath. Moira sat by the fire, her hands wrapped around a warm cup. The birch trees at the edge of camp stood still, watching. And from the woods beyond, nothing moved. No threat. Only memory, only time, and a girl asleep at last beneath a roof of stars and kindness. The days that followed Lynn's arrival passed like ripples over still water, small, quiet, and impossible to measure unless one paid close attention. There was no drama, no storm, no sudden change. Just time moving slowly through the camp, softening the edges of hunger and memory. Lynn didn't speak often, but her silence was not the wary kind. It was the kind that had been practiced, worn like a second skin. When she did speak, her words were always short, careful, sometimes strangely poetic. She called smoke sky ribbon, and referred to the trees near the birches as the listening ones. Moira didn't question her names. In some ways they were more honest than the ones the world had already forgotten. Each morning, Lynn helped Isla gather water or berries, sometimes weaving strips of old cloth into cords for snares. Adan taught her how to check the traps without disturbing the surrounding branches. She never touched the goat, but she always left a bit of her bread for it near the stone wall. Bel, for his part, took to walking the edges of the camp again, more watchful now, as though Lynn's presence had stirred something out in the trees. The wind had changed again, too, softer but persistent. It carried with it the sound of far off things, trees creaking in rhythms too slow to name, birds calling in brief bursts, and once the faint echo of something that might have been a song. Moira heard it just before dusk one evening, standing near the edge of the stream, a low hum rising and falling, too steady to be wind, too distant to be close. When she turned to listen again, it had vanished. That night she dreamt of her mother's, singing, a lullaby hummed beneath candlelight. Not words, just notes. The kind of music made not for performance, but for holding someone close. She woke with tears on her cheeks and a warmth in her chest that hadn't been there the night before. By the end of the week, the camp had grown more than just quiet. It had grown still, not in fear, but in waiting. They all felt it. Something in the world had paused, not because it was ending, but because it was gathering breath between verses, like the moment between one song and the next, when the throat swells and the air hushes. A silence not of absence, but of becoming. Moira tried to name it once, while mending a seam near the fire. It's like something is watching us, but not to harm us, just watching to see what we do next. Bel nodded, but didn't reply. Lynn looked up from her braidwork. Like the moment before the rain falls, she said softly. Moira smiled. Yes, exactly. That afternoon they heard singing for real. Not a dream, not a memory. A voice thin, cracked, but steady, carried down from the ridge where the path curved out of view. It came slowly, note by note, like someone coaxing a tune from a nearly forgotten throat. Adan leapt to his feet. Isla froze mid-stir. Even the goat stopped chewing and turned toward the sound. Moira stood slowly, heart thudding. They waited, breath caught in their throats. Then the voice faded, and nothing followed. The next day, they searched. Not far, just to the ridge. Bel led with Adan and Moira close behind. They found no sign of campfire, no footprints in the soft moss. Only a small stone placed atop a tree stump. On it a smear of red pigment like crushed berries, and beside it a feather, long, gray, carefully tied with a bit of grass into a loop. Moira lifted the feather, examined it, and placed it gently into the folds of her shawl. Whoever had sung, they hadn't meant to be found, only heard. That evening, Lynn sang. No one asked her to. She just began quietly, as the light faded, her voice barely louder than the wind. The song had no words, just a pattern of hungs and tones, rising and falling like breath. It was not beautiful in the way a polished voice is beautiful. It was raw, wild, ancient, like the land itself remembering how to sing. Even the fire quieted. When she finished, no one clapped. No one spoke. The bells did not ring, but something in the air had shifted. The silence that followed was not empty. It was full. Whole. Like the pause between two songs. And somewhere beyond the birch trees the world exhaled. The season was turning, though no one dared say it aloud. It wasn't the bloom of flowers or the rush of meltwater that marked the change. It was subtler than that. The moss was thicker. The birds lingered longer in the branches before fleeing. The wind no longer bit at the bones, but nudged gently at the sleeves. Even the trees seemed to sigh differently, as if letting go of their long-held breath. In the camp, they rose earlier, worked longer, and moved with a rhythm not born of fear or survival, but of something gentler maintenance, perhaps stewardship. Moira felt it most in her hands. They no longer ached from cold, but from use honest. Steady use, stitching, stirring, smoothing. The tools she once clutched like weapons now rested softly in her grip. She had started tending a patch of earth near the stream, where the soil had thawed first. Not quite planting, just encouraging. She moved a few stones, loosened the dirt, tucked a seed here and there, more out of hope than planning. Maybe nothing would grow, but the act itself was enough. Isla had taken to weaving, again not out of necessity, but pleasure. She plaited grass and vine into long braids, hanging them from the trees, or draping them across the stone wall like quiet decorations. She'd begun humming again, not always tunes they knew, but little wordless notes that made the fire feel warmer, and this wind seem less distant. Erin, now stronger and steadier, was learning to stand. Her steps were small, her knees wobbly, but every fall ended in laughter, not tears. Aidan built things, not because they needed building, but because he wanted to see if he could. A second wall, a drying rack, a place to store their few tools. He carved the handle of his spear with marks he wouldn't explain, little notches and spirals, half memory, half invention. Bell helped when needed, but mostly he watched, his gaze steady, quiet. He stood near the goat, who had grown fat and lazy with the spring grass. The two of them, man and beast, seemed to understand each other more than they did anyone else. Lynn walked the edges of camp like a shadow with purpose. She rarely spoke now, but she left things behind, small gifts. A bird skull cleaned and placed gently near the fire, a bundle of moss shaped into a cradle. Once she pressed a piece of bark into Moira's hand without a word. On it, scratched carefully with charcoal, was a spiral inside a spiral. No meaning offered. None needed. One evening, Moira asked Bell what the drawing meant. He looked at it for a long time before answering. It's the shape of time when it remembers itself. That week they found the ruins of a house, not far just past the ridge, hidden behind thick brush and an old rowan tree whose branches hung low enough to brush the earth. The house was little more than 4 walls and a sunken roof, but something about it felt different, not just forgotten, but left behind with care. There were no broken plates, no overturned chairs, just space and silence. Inside they found a pile of dried lavender, still faintly sweet, a wooden spoon tucked into a knot in the wall, and buried under a patch of earth beside the hearth, a tin box filled with seeds wrapped in cloth. The cloths were labeled. In faded ink, turnip, barley, sorrel, leek. Moira pressed her hand to the box and closed her eyes. The world was offering them something, not treasure, not magic. Just memory. Something once buried, now returned. They called the place the quiet house. They didn't move in, not fully, but they returned often, a place to gather water, to rest, to speak without needing to say anything loud, a place for the harvesting of forgotten things, a place for remembering that survival, was not only about fire and food, Dot, but also about what came after, Dot, about what you planted when your hands were free again. The ground had stopped trembling, Dot. It took Moira weeks to notice. Not because the quakes had been loud or violent, they hadn't, but for months now, every movement through the forest, every breath of the wind, every step across frost-bitten soil had carried with it a feeling of fragility, like the world beneath her feet was tired of holding weight. But one morning she woke, stretched her legs beneath the shawl, and felt it. Steadiness. As if the ground, like her own ribs, had exhaled for the first time in a long while. The camp was quiet that day, not solemn, just slow. The fire had burned low but warm. The smell of boiling nettles hung gently in the air. Adon was fishing at the stream, no longer hunched in concentration, but sitting back on his heels, waiting as if the water owed him nothing. Isla was at the stone wall with Lynn, weaving something together, nettle, cord, wild grass, maybe nothing at all. The baby, now walking more than crawling, toddled between the women like a sunbeam looking for somewhere to rest. Moira sat with her back against the birch near the edge of camp, a bowl of warm barley in her lap and a sliver of sunlight on her cheek. She watched it all, and for the first time in seasons, her mind wasn't scanning the trees, not measuring the sky, not counting the food, just being. Bell approached quietly, as he always did. His cloak no longer sagged with wet and weight. His beard was trimmed now, less like a shield and more like a choice. He sat beside her without a word and offered a small object, wrapped in cloth. Moira unwrapped it slowly. Inside, a carved wooden figure, crude, simple, a woman in a shawl, a bundle held at her hip. No face, just the shape of one. No words. But she knew it was her. Bell shrugged, as if apologizing for its roughness. It's not much. Moira held it in her palm. It's more than most people leave behind. He said nothing. They sat together, watching the fire, the child, the trees. That evening, the wind shifted again, but this time it wasn't cold, it was warm. Warm like the first night in a new home, like the moment a baby falls asleep in your arms, like a hearth still blowing long after the meal is done. Moira stood slowly, walked the edge of camp, stopped beneath the bells tied above the wall. They did not ring, but they swayed, gently, as if saying goodbye, or thank you. She didn't call. The others didn't say what she felt. But later, when Adon returned, he brought 2 fish, the kind that flash silver only when the season is right. Isla plucked a sprig of something sweet-smelling from the patch near the quiet house and tucked it behind Lynn's ear. Bell cleaned the tools, not because they needed it, but because it felt right, and the goat, well-fed and unbothered, curled up beneath the birch. Content at last. After supper, Moira sat with Aaron in her lap. The child had fallen, asleep quickly, her breath soft against Moira's collarbone. Moira pressed her lips gently to the baby's crown, closed her eyes, and let the moment wash over her. She thought of the cave, the storm, the snow, the fire that had saved them. The hunger that had changed them, the wind that had warned them, and the bells. Always the bells, watching, waiting, never loud, just true. The stars came early that night. Bright, slow, unhurried. No wolf cried. No bells rang. There was no ending. Only stillness. The ground held that the people rested, and the world, for one long and merciful breath, remembered how to be quiet. And now, dear listener, the fire has burned low dot, the wind has stilled dot, the footsteps have faded. You've walked with us through snow-covered hills, into quiet caves, beside streams and stones and silent bells. You've sat at fires warmed by barley and memory, watched babies take their first steps on soft earth, and listened to the hush between songs. And now, there is nothing left to do dot, no more hunger, no more fear dot, just warmth dot and breath and sleep. Let your body rest now. You are safe here. Let the weight slip from your shoulders like a shoal set gently aside. The ground beneath you is steady. The sky above is kind dot, and the world, at least for this quiet moment, has nothing more to ask of you. Close. Your eyes dot let go dot, you are home. Good night.